Korean CEO loses control after sighting the black maid in the guest room.
She's ordinary. He's extraordinary.
And in one room, sparks ignite that neither of them can resist. Watch how everything changes.
The rain began just after sunset.
Soft at first, then steady, drumming against the glass skyscrapers of Seoul like a quiet warning. From the 63rd floor of Han Global Tower, the city looked like a glowing ocean of lights. Cars crawled across bridges like fireflies, and neon signs reflected in the wet streets below. Inside the luxurious penthouse residence, everything was silent.
Too silent.
Naomi adjusted the sleeves of her simple black maid uniform as she stood outside the guest room door. It was only her third day working in the mansion, yet she still felt like she was walking through someone else's dream.
Or someone else's world.
The marble floors were so polished she could see her reflection in them. Massive paintings lined the walls. Crystal chandeliers glowed softly above her head.
Nothing here resembled the life she had known.
Just 2 months ago, Naomi had been sharing a cramped apartment with 3 other international students, worrying about tuition fees and overdue rent. Now she was standing inside the private residence of one of Korea's most powerful CEOs. A man she had only seen once. And that brief encounter alone had left the entire staff nervous for hours. The house manager had warned her immediately. Never disturb him.
Never speak unless spoken to. And never enter his personal study. Naomi had nodded politely. She wasn't here to cause trouble. She just needed the job.
Taking a small breath, she pushed open the guest room door. The room smelled faintly of lavender and fresh linen. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, painting soft silver lines across the wooden floor. Naomi stepped inside quietly, carrying a basket of freshly pressed sheets. The guest room was rarely used, according to the staff. Which was strange. Because tonight, she had been given very specific instructions.
Change the bedding. Prepare the wine glasses.
Open the curtains slightly. And place candles on the side table. It felt less like preparing a room, and more like preparing a moment. Naomi hummed softly to herself as she tucked the bedsheets neatly beneath the mattress. Her voice filled the quiet space gently, almost like she was comforting herself. Being alone in a mansion this large felt unsettling. She moved to the window and pulled the curtains open. Outside, rain slid slowly down the glass like liquid diamonds. For a moment, Naomi simply stared at the view. Seoul was breathtaking at night, but also lonely. Her thoughts drifted home. To Nigeria. To the sound of her mother laughing in the kitchen. To the warm chaos of family dinners and loud conversations. Here, everything felt beautiful. But distant. She shook the thoughts away and focused on finishing her work. The wine glasses went on the small wooden table beside the couch. 2 glasses. A bottle of red wine placed carefully between them. Naomi raised an eyebrow slightly. Someone important must be visiting, she thought. Just as she reached to light one of the candles, she suddenly felt it. That strange sensation. The feeling that someone was watching her. Her humming stopped instantly. The room felt colder somehow. Slowly, Naomi turned around. And her heart skipped. Standing quietly in the doorway was a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit. His presence filled the entire entrance without him saying a word. Sharp jawline. Dark eyes. Hair slightly damp from the rain outside. Even if she hadn't seen his photo during her job interview, she would have known immediately who he was. Kang Joon-woo. The CEO of Han Global. One of the youngest and most feared business leaders in South Korea. Naomi froze completely. She hadn't even heard him approach. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Joon-woo's gaze slowly scanned the room. Then stopped on her. The silence stretched. He had returned home earlier than expected. A long meeting with investors had been cancelled because of the storm. He had intended to pass the hallway and go straight to his study. But then he heard something unusual. A voice. Soft. Melodic. Someone humming. That alone had caught his attention. But the moment he looked inside the guest room, he saw her. Standing near the window, surrounded by soft candlelight and moonlight. And something inside him shifted unexpectedly. Joon-woo wasn't a man who noticed women easily. He had attended hundreds of elite events. Met countless celebrities and models. But this moment felt strangely different. It wasn't just Naomi's beauty. It was something else. Something calm. Something natural. Something completely untouched by the ambition and manipulation he saw every day. His eyes lingered longer than they should have. Naomi quickly lowered her gaze respectfully. I'm sorry, sir. Her voice was gentle but slightly nervous. I was preparing the guest room. Joon-woo didn't respond immediately. His sharp gaze was still studying her face. Her dark curls were tied loosely behind her head. A few strands had escaped and framed her cheeks.
There was no makeup. No attempt to impress anyone. Just quiet elegance. Finally, he spoke.
Who are you?
The question was simple,
but his voice carried quiet authority. Naomi clasped her hands politely in front of her.
My name is Naomi, sir. A brief pause.
I'm the new maid. For some reason, the answer made Joon-woo's brow tighten slightly.
He didn't remember approving any new staff recently. Yet that wasn't the thought bothering him.
The real problem was something far more unusual.
He was still looking at her, and he couldn't seem to stop.
That had never happened before.
Not once.
After a few seconds, he forced his expression back to its usual calm.
Finish your work, he said quietly.
Naomi nodded quickly. Yes, sir.
Joon-woo turned and walked away down the hallway.
His footsteps were slow, controlled.
But the moment he disappeared around the corner, he stopped and frowned slightly,
because a strange thought had just crossed his mind. One that irritated him.
Why did I stay there that long?
He exhaled slowly and continued walking. Inside the guest room, Naomi finally released the breath she had been holding.
Her heart was beating faster than usual.
So that's him, she whispered softly. The CEO everyone feared. Yet strangely, he hadn't seemed cruel.
Just distant. But there was something else she couldn't quite explain. The way he looked at her. Not angry. Not cold. Just intensely curious.
Naomi shook the thought away and finished lighting the candle.
But somewhere else in the mansion,
Kang Joon-woo was standing by the massive window of his private study,
looking out at the storm. And for the first time in a very long time, his thoughts were not on business deals. Not on shareholders. Not on profit.
They were on a girl standing quietly in the guest room.
A girl named Naomi. And although he didn't know it yet,
that small moment in the hallway had just begun a story neither of them could walk away from.
Morning arrived quietly over Seoul.
Thin sunlight pushed through the clouds after the night's rain, casting soft reflections across the tall glass buildings surrounding Han Global Tower. Inside the luxurious penthouse residence, the day had already begun for the staff. Footsteps moved quickly across the marble floors. Breakfast was being prepared in the massive kitchen. Housekeepers polished every surface until it gleamed. Everything had to be perfect. Because when Kang Joon-woo was home, the entire mansion operated like a well-trained machine.
Precise. Silent. Efficient.
Naomi stood beside the long dining table, carefully arranging white porcelain plates.
It still felt unreal to her.
The table alone could seat nearly 20 people, yet most mornings only one person ever sat there.
The CEO.
She had heard plenty about him already. The staff spoke about him in quiet voices when they thought no one was listening. He built the company twice as fast as his father did. They say he only sleeps 4 hours a night. Investors from 3 countries are trying to partner with him.
But there was one thing everyone repeated.
Kang Joon-woo never noticed anyone.
Not employees. Not assistants. Not even guests.
His mind was always somewhere else, focused on deals, numbers, and strategies.
Which was why Naomi had been surprised the night before. The way he had stood in the doorway. The way his eyes had lingered.
She shook the thought away as she placed the final spoon beside a plate. You're overthinking it, she told herself.
To him, she was just another employee. And that was perfectly fine with her.
She preferred being invisible. Just as Naomi finished arranging the table, the doors to the dining room opened. Every staff member instantly straightened.
Joon-woo walked in. His presence alone changed the atmosphere.
He wore a dark gray suit that fit him perfectly, his expression calm but unreadable.
He didn't greet anyone. Didn't acknowledge the staff. He simply walked to the chair at the head of the table and sat down. Just like every morning.
The house manager signaled quietly for the staff to leave the room.
But as Naomi turned to follow them, she felt something. A gaze. Her instincts told her not to look. But she did anyway.
And sure enough,
Joon-woo was looking directly at her.
Not the table.
Not the food. Huh. For a moment, Naomi froze.
Then she quickly lowered her head respectfully and exited the dining room with the others. Behind her, Joon-woo slowly picked up his coffee cup.
But his thoughts weren't on breakfast. Naomi. The name had stayed in his mind all night. Which annoyed him. He wasn't someone who remembered employees' names.
Yet for some reason,
he did now.
He took a sip of coffee, his expression thoughtful. Meanwhile, downstairs in the staff kitchen, Naomi was washing dishes when one of the older housekeepers leaned closer. "You saw him this morning, right?"
Naomi nodded. "Of course."
The woman lowered her voice. "That man built an empire before turning 35.
Another worker joined the conversation.
And he never dates anyone."
Naomi blinked.
"Never."
The woman shook her head.
"Never. Not even once. No time for it."
The staff laughed quietly, but Naomi found the information surprising. A man that powerful, that successful, and completely alone. She pushed the thought aside and continued working. It wasn't her business anyway.
Upstairs, Joon-woo had already finished breakfast and moved to his private study. His assistant, Mr. Park, stood across from his desk holding a tablet.
"You have 3 meetings today, sir."
"The Tokyo investors arrive at 2.
Joon-woo nodded absent-mindedly, but something interrupted his focus. A faint sound in the hallway. Footsteps. Light. He glanced toward the glass door of his office. And there she was again.
Naomi.
She was carrying a basket of folded laundry as she walked down the hallway.
Her movements were quiet,
Careful. Almost like she was trying not to disturb anyone. But for some reason, Joon-woo found himself watching her through the glass. Mr. Park noticed his distraction. "Sir." Joon-woo looked back at him.
"Yes. The investor documents." Joon-woo blinked slightly, refocusing. "Leave them."
Mr. Park placed the tablet on the desk but hesitated. In the 3 years he had worked for Joon-woo, he had never once seen the CEO lose concentration. Not even for a second. Yet today, something was clearly different.
After the assistant left, Joon-woo leaned back slightly in his chair.
His gaze drifted back toward the hallway.
Naomi had disappeared around the corner.
He frowned slightly. Ridiculous.
Why was he paying attention to a maid?
He had companies to run. Deals worth billions.
Decisions that could affect thousands of employees.
And yet, his thoughts returned to the same image. Naomi standing in the guest room the night before. Soft candlelight. Calm expression. Completely unaware of the effect she had on him. Joon-woo exhaled slowly. This was exactly the type of distraction he avoided his entire life. Emotion complicated judgment. And judgment was everything. He stood up and walked toward the window overlooking Seoul.
The city stretched endlessly beneath him. A world of competition.
Strategy. Power. This was the world he understood. But for some reason, a small part of his mind was still thinking about something far simpler.
A girl humming softly in an empty guest room. Later that evening, Naomi returned upstairs to clean the dining room after dinner. She believed the CEO had already left for another meeting. The mansion felt quieter again. She wiped the long table carefully, humming the same soft tune she often sang when she worked.
It relaxed her. Made the huge house feel less lonely. But she didn't realize something. Just outside the doorway, Joon-woo had returned earlier than expected. He stopped when he heard the sound again. Her voice. Soft. Peaceful. He stood there silently for a moment, listening. Then he stepped into the doorway. Naomi turned suddenly. And once again, their eyes met. The same stillness filled the room. This time, Joon-woo spoke first.
"You sing while you work."
Naomi looked slightly embarrassed. "Sometimes." "Why?"
She hesitated before answering honestly. "It makes quiet places feel less empty."
Her answer surprised him.
Not because of the words,
but because of how genuine they sounded.
For the first time in years, Joon-woo realized something unusual.
This mansion had always been silent, cold, efficient. But now, it didn't feel quite as empty anymore. And the reason was standing right in front of him. Naomi.
The days that followed felt strangely different inside the penthouse. Not because anything dramatic had happened,
but because something subtle had changed.
At least for one person.
Kang Joon-woo. 4 years his life had followed the same strict routine. Wake up before sunrise. Meetings. Negotiations. Decisions.
Late-night strategy calls.
4 hours of sleep. Repeat. His world ran on discipline and control.
Emotion had never been part of the equation. Yet recently, something had begun interrupting that perfect rhythm.
And her name was Naomi. It started with little moments.
Moments he should have ignored. One afternoon, Joon-woo walked through the second-floor hallway while reviewing documents on his tablet.
Normally he wouldn't even glance at the staff. But a soft sound caught his attention. Laughter. Quiet and genuine. He looked up.
At the end of the hallway, Naomi was kneeling beside one of the older housekeepers, helping her pick up a basket of fallen towels. "You shouldn't carry so many by yourself," Naomi said gently.
The older woman chuckled.
"You're the maid, not my mother."
Naomi smiled.
"Someone has to look after you."
The moment was simple. Unimportant. Yet Joon-woo stood there longer than necessary. Watching. Something about Naomi's kindness felt unusual. Most people in his world were careful. Calculated. Always aware of status and hierarchy.
But Naomi behaved the same way with everyone.
Staff. Security. Even him. Natural. Honest.
And that honesty was beginning to intrigue him. Meanwhile, Naomi remained completely unaware of the storm she was slowly creating.
Her routine was simple. Clean rooms. Prepare meals. Organize laundry.
Occasionally she would take short breaks in the small reading corner near the guest rooms. It was the only cozy space in the enormous penthouse. There was a tall window overlooking the city and a comfortable armchair tucked beside a bookshelf. That evening Naomi sat there with a novel in her hands. An old English romance story she had borrowed from the house library.
She loved stories.
They reminded her why she had come to Korea in the first place.
To study literature.
To build a future. To prove to her family that her dreams mattered. She turned a page slowly, completely absorbed in the story. So absorbed.
She didn't notice someone approaching.
Joon-woo had returned home earlier than expected again.
Another meeting had been cancelled. Another evening suddenly free.
And once again, his feet carried him upstairs.
He didn't plan to look for Naomi. At least that's what he told himself.
But when he saw her sitting quietly by the window,
he stopped.
Her legs were folded comfortably beneath her as she read. The city lights reflected softly in the glass behind her.
For a moment, Joon-woo simply watched. She looked peaceful.
Untouched by the constant pressure that defined his own life.
And somehow,
that calm presence pulled his attention like gravity.
Naomi suddenly sensed someone there.
She looked up.
And froze. "Sir."
She quickly stood up, nearly dropping the book. "I'm sorry, I was just reading," Joon-woo finished calmly.
She nodded nervously.
"Yes."
He glanced at the book in her hands.
"Do you always read during breaks?"
"Only when I have time."
"And what do you read?"
Naomi hesitated. "Mostly stories." His eyebrow lifted slightly.
"Fiction?" "Yes."
She waited for him to criticize her. But instead, something surprising happened. Joon-woo pulled a book from the shelf beside her. Then another. And another.
Within seconds he had 3 novels in his hand.
"These are better," he said simply.
Naomi blinked in confusion. "You read romance novels, sir?"
For the first time since she met him, a faint smile appeared on his lips.
"Not romance."
He handed her the books.
"Stories about people."
Naomi looked at the titles curiously.
"You've read all of these?" "Years ago."
She studied him for a moment. It was strange. She had expected the powerful CEO to be distant and intimidating. Yet in this moment, he seemed almost normal. Just a man recommending books. "Thank you," she said softly. Joon-woo nodded once, then turned to leave.
But as he walked away, Naomi suddenly spoke again.
"Sir." He stopped. She held up the book he had given her.
"Do you have a favorite character?"
For a second he didn't answer. Then he said something unexpected.
"The one who changes the story."
Naomi tilted her head.
"What do you mean?"
Joon-woo looked back at her briefly.
"The character who arrives quietly, but changes everything."
Then he walked away,
leaving Naomi staring after him in confusion.
Later that night the mansion was almost completely silent. Most of the staff had gone to their quarters downstairs.
Only Naomi remained upstairs finishing a few tasks.
She entered the guest room again.
The same room where she had first met the CEO.
Soft music played quietly from her phone.
A slow instrumental piece she loved listening to while cleaning. Once she finished dusting the shelves, Naomi paused. The music continued playing. Without thinking, she began moving gently with the rhythm.
Just small steps. A quiet dance.
The kind she used to do with her sister back home. Her laughter echoed softly as she spun once across the wooden floor.
For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Forgot about work. Forgot about responsibility. She was simply enjoying the music. But she didn't realize something. The door was slightly open. And someone was standing there again. Joon-woo. He had been walking past the room when he heard the music.
Curiosity had pulled him closer.
And when he looked inside, he saw Naomi dancing. Not professionally. Not to impress anyone. Just freely. Happily. The sight caught him completely off guard.
For years, Joon-woo's world had been built on discipline and restraint.
But Naomi looked like the opposite of that world. Light. Carefree. Alive. And suddenly he realized something strange. He didn't want to interrupt the moment. So he stayed where he was, watching quietly,
until Naomi turned
and saw him. Her eyes widened immediately.
Oh my goodness. She grabbed her phone quickly, stopping the music.
I'm so sorry, sir. Her face flushed with embarrassment.
I didn't know anyone was there.
But Joon-woo didn't look angry. He didn't look annoyed. Instead, he stepped slightly into the room and said something that shocked her.
Continue.
Naomi blinked.
What?
The dancing. His voice was calm.
You looked happier a moment ago.
She stared at him like she wasn't sure she heard correctly.
Sir, I can't dance in front of my boss. Why not? Because it's embarrassing.
Joon-woo studied her for a moment. Then he said quietly.
You don't look embarrassing when you forget the world exists.
Naomi didn't know what to say.
The room fell silent again.
But something had shifted. Something unspoken.
And as Joon-woo stood there looking at her in the soft light of the guest room,
he finally admitted a truth he had been avoiding.
Naomi was no longer just another employee in his house.
She had become a distraction he couldn't ignore. And the more he tried to control that feeling,
the stronger it became. For years, the employees of the Han Global headquarters believed one thing about their CEO. Kang Joon-woo never changed his routine. He arrived at work at exactly 7:45 a.m.
Meetings started on time. Decisions were made quickly.
Emotions were never visible. His discipline had built a billion-dollar empire. But lately, small cracks had begun appearing in that perfect routine.
And the reason lived inside his penthouse. Her name was Naomi.
On Monday morning, Joon-woo's assistant, Mr. Park, stood outside the conference room reviewing the day's schedule.
He frowned slightly.
Sir, your evening dinner with the Shanghai investors, should I confirm the reservation?
Joon-woo didn't even look up from the document in his hands.
Cancel it.
Mr. Park blinked.
Cancel it.
Yes.
Should I reschedule?
No. That was unusual. Joon-woo rarely cancelled important meetings. But Mr. Park nodded politely.
Understood.
Later that afternoon another surprise came.
At exactly 5:30 p.m., Joon-woo stood up from his desk.
His assistant looked up.
Sir. I'm leaving. Leaving? For another meeting?
No. A pause.
I'm going home.
Mr. Park nearly dropped his tablet.
Going home early was something the CEO almost never did.
Yet recently, it had happened 3 times that week.
Back at the penthouse, Naomi was folding freshly washed linens in the laundry room. She had settled into the job more comfortably now. The other staff members had become friendlier. The routines felt familiar. And although the mansion was still enormous and intimidating, it no longer felt completely foreign. As she worked, she hummed quietly again. It was a habit she had developed since childhood. Whenever she felt nervous or alone, she sang softly. The sound echoed through the hallway as she carried the folded sheets upstairs. But the moment she reached the second-floor corridor, she stopped. Joon-woo was standing there. He had arrived home earlier than expected again. Their eyes met. Naomi immediately lowered her gaze politely. Good evening, sir. Joon-woo nodded slightly. Good evening. She moved to pass him carefully. But as she stepped forward, one corner of the sheet bundle slipped from her arms. The stack shifted suddenly. Naomi tried to catch it. But the fabric tangled around her feet. And before she could regain balance, she slipped. The moment happened quickly. Her body tilted backward toward the marble floor. But before she could fall, 2 strong arms caught her. Naomi gasped softly. She found herself held firmly against Joon-woo's chest. One arm around her waist, the other steadying her shoulder. For a second, neither of them moved. The hallway felt completely silent. Naomi's heart was racing so fast she could hear it in her ears. She could also hear something else. Joon-woo's breathing. Steady, but closer than she had ever been to him before. She quickly tried to step away. I'm sorry, sir. But Joon-woo didn't release her immediately. Not because he meant to hold her longer.
but because something strange had just happened.
When he caught her, his first instinct had been simple: prevent her from falling. Yet the moment she landed against him,
something inside him reacted unexpectedly. Her warmth, the soft scent of her shampoo,
the way she instinctively grabbed his jacket to steady herself.
For the first time in years, his perfectly controlled mind went completely still.
Naomi gently stepped back, finally breaking the moment. I didn't mean to drop the sheets. Joon-woo blinked slightly, returning to himself.
The floor is slippery, he said calmly. She nodded quickly. Yes. She bent down to pick up the scattered linens. But Joon-woo surprised her again. He crouched down and helped her gather them. Naomi stared in shock.
Sir, you don't have to.
It's fine. His tone was casual. Almost normal.
They finished collecting the sheets together. When Naomi stood again, she held the bundle tightly in her arms.
Thank you, she said quietly. Joon-woo nodded once. Then something unexpected slipped out of his mouth.
You should wear shoes with better grip.
Naomi blinked.
Yes, sir.
For a moment they simply stood there again.
Then Naomi excused herself and continued down the hallway.
But long after she disappeared around the corner, Joon-woo remained standing where he was.
Later that evening, Joon-woo sat alone in his private study. The city lights shimmered through the massive glass windows. Documents lay open on his desk. Emails waited for responses. Business calls needed attention. Yet his mind kept replaying one small moment.
Naomi falling. And the way she had looked when he caught her.
Surprised.
Embarrassed. But also, trusting. He leaned back slowly in his chair.
This was exactly the kind of emotional distraction he had avoided his entire life.
It weakened judgment.
Blurred priorities.
Yet the more he tried to ignore it,
the more impossible it became. For years, people had described him as a man who controlled everything.
Markets. Negotiations.
Entire industries. But tonight, Kang Joon-woo admitted something he had never experienced before.
His control was slipping.
And strangely,
he wasn't sure he wanted it back.
Across the mansion, Naomi sat on the small balcony outside her room. The cool evening air brushed gently against her face. She stared at the glowing skyline of Seoul. Her mind replayed the moment in the hallway again.
The way he caught her.
The way he helped pick up the sheets. That wasn't the cold, intimidating CEO everyone talked about.
That had been something else. Something human. She hugged her arms lightly around herself.
Why do I feel like something strange is happening? She whispered. Deep down, Naomi sensed it too. The quiet shift. The invisible tension building between them.
And neither of them knew yet that the moment in the hallway had only made one thing clear. Kang Joon-woo was no longer just noticing her. He was losing the perfect control that had defined his entire life. The storm arrived without warning.
By late evening, dark clouds had swallowed the Seoul skyline, and thunder rolled across the city like distant drums. Inside the penthouse of Han Global Tower, the staff hurried to finish their duties before the weather worsened. Heavy rain lashed against the enormous windows, blurring the bright city lights outside. Naomi stood in the kitchen, drying the last set of dishes while listening to the storm.
She had always loved rainy nights.
Back home, storms meant sitting together with family, drinking hot tea while the rain drummed against the roof. But here, inside the massive mansion, the sound of thunder felt different.
Lonelier.
Across the room, one of the older housekeepers sighed nervously. I hate storms like this, she muttered. Naomi smiled softly. They pass quickly.
Before the woman could reply,
a loud crack of thunder exploded outside.
Then suddenly, the lights went out.
The entire penthouse went dark. For a moment, the house was completely silent.
Then someone gasped. Another worker laughed nervously.
Power outage. Emergency lights flickered briefly in the hallway, casting faint shadows along the walls. The house manager clapped her hands once. Everyone stay calm.
We have backup generators downstairs.
It should return soon. Staff members began gathering candles from the storage cabinets. Within minutes, soft golden lights flickered throughout the mansion. The atmosphere changed immediately. The bright modern home suddenly felt warmer. Older. Almost peaceful. But as the staff moved downstairs to check the generator system, Naomi remembered something. The guest room window. Earlier that afternoon she had noticed it didn't close properly. With the storm outside, it might blow open. I'll check upstairs, she told the house manager. The woman nodded. Be careful.
Naomi climbed the staircase slowly, holding a small candle. The hallway upstairs was dim, shadows dancing across the walls. The storm outside was stronger now. Wind howled softly against the glass windows. When Naomi pushed open the guest room door, she immediately saw the problem. The tall window near the balcony had swung partially open. Rain blew inside, scattering droplets across the wooden floor. Oh no! She hurried toward the window, placing the candle carefully on the side table. The wind pushed against the curtains, making them flutter wildly. Naomi struggled to pull the window shut. But the storm was stronger than she expected. Another loud clap of thunder shook the building. For a brief second, lightning illuminated the room in bright white light. Naomi finally managed to grab the window frame with both hands and force it closed. With a firm push. Click. The latch locked. She sighed in relief. Finally. But just as she turned around, the door opened behind her. Naomi jumped slightly. Standing in the doorway was Kang Joon-woo. He held a candle in his hand, its small flame glowing against the darkness of the room. The soft light flickered across his face, making his usually sharp features look calmer. Less intimidating. For a moment, the two of them simply looked at each other. The storm outside roared. But inside the room, everything felt strangely quiet. You shouldn't be up here alone, Joon-woo said. His voice was lower than usual. Almost gentle. Naomi nodded slightly. I came to close the window. He glanced toward the glass behind her. Rainwater streaked the outside surface like silver lines. You fixed it. Yes. Another flash of lightning briefly lit the room. Joon-woo stepped inside, placing his candle beside hers. Now the room glowed with two small flames, casting warm shadows across the walls. Naomi suddenly realized something. They were completely alone. The rest of the staff was downstairs dealing with the generator. The storm had sealed the quiet space around them. Her heart began beating faster. Not from fear, but from something else she couldn't quite explain. Joon-woo leaned casually against the table. The flickering candlelight softened the usually strict lines of his face. Are you afraid of storms? He asked. Naomi shook her head slowly. No. Most people are. I grew up with storms like this, she said softly. In Nigeria, rain can last for hours. Sometimes days. Joon-woo studied her expression. You don't seem afraid of much. Naomi shrugged slightly. When you grow up learning to survive things, storms don't feel so big. Her answer surprised him. He had spent years surrounded by wealthy people who panicked over the smallest inconvenience. Yet Naomi spoke about struggle as if it was simply part of life. You're stronger than most people I know, he said quietly. Naomi looked up at him. The compliment caught her off guard. Thank you. Another moment of silence passed. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Something about the candlelight made the room feel smaller. More intimate. Naomi suddenly realized how close they were standing. Just a few steps apart. Close enough to see the reflection of the candle flame in his dark eyes. Close enough to notice the subtle tiredness beneath his calm expression. Without thinking, she asked something unexpected. Do storms bother you, sir? Joon-woo didn't answer immediately. Then he gave a small shake of his head. No. But you don't seem relaxed either. That observation made him pause. Few people ever spoke to him that directly. Yet Naomi's voice held no disrespect. Just curiosity. He looked at the rain outside. Storms don't bother me. A brief pause. Silence does. Naomi tilted her head slightly. What do you mean? Joon-woo glanced around the enormous guest room. This house is very quiet. She smiled softly. That's why I sing when I work. Joon-woo remembered. The humming in the hallway. The music during her dance. Those small sounds had slowly filled the mansion with something unfamiliar. Warmth. For the first time in years, the powerful CEO admitted something silently to himself. This house had never felt alive before Naomi arrived. Thunder rumbled again outside. The candlelight flickered. And suddenly the air between them felt heavier. Charged. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. But both of them felt it. The invisible tension that had been growing for weeks. Finally, Naomi stepped back slightly. I should go check if the power came back. But before she could move toward the door, Joon-woo spoke quietly. Naomi. She stopped. His voice sounded different. Not commanding. Just honest. The moment I saw you in this room, the first night. He hesitated,
as if choosing his words carefully. Something changed.
Naomi's heart skipped. She didn't know how to respond. The storm continued outside. The candles flickered softly.
And in that quiet guest room, both of them realized the same thing. What had begun as a simple encounter between a CEO and a maid had quietly turned into something neither of them could ignore anymore.
The storm had softened.
Outside the tall windows of the guest room, the rain had slowed into a gentle rhythm. The thunder that once shook the building now echoed only faintly in the distance.
But inside the room,
the tension had not faded.
It had grown stronger.
Naomi stood a few steps away from the door, her hand resting lightly on the handle. Behind her, the warm glow of candlelight filled the room.
And behind that light, Kang Joon-woo was still watching her.
Neither of them had moved since his last words. The moment I saw you in this room, something changed.
Naomi's heart was beating faster than she liked. She had never imagined the powerful CEO would speak to her like that. She had expected distance,
authority,
professional boundaries, not quiet honesty, not vulnerability. She turned slowly to face him again.
The candlelight flickered gently across his face, revealing something she had never seen before. Uncertainty. For a man known for absolute confidence, it looked almost unfamiliar on him. What changed?
Naomi asked softly.
Her voice carried curiosity, but also caution.
Joon-woo exhaled slowly.
He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation. Yet explaining this feeling felt strangely harder.
You did, he said simply. Naomi blinked. I did.
Yes. He stepped closer, though still leaving a respectful distance between them. Before you arrived, this house was just a place to sleep.
His gaze drifted briefly around the room.
Everything was quiet, predictable.
He looked back at her.
Now I hear music in the hallways.
Naomi lowered her eyes shyly.
That's just me humming. It's not just humming.
There was something firm in his voice now.
It's life. The word hung in the air between them. Naomi didn't know what to say. She had never thought her small habits could affect someone like him. But Joon-woo continued. When I work, I hear you laughing with the staff. When I walk through the hallway, I see you helping people.
And every time I pass this room. He glanced at the wooden floor where she had danced days earlier.
I remember you dancing like no one was watching.
Naomi's cheeks warmed with embarrassment.
You weren't supposed to see that. Maybe not.
His voice softened slightly.
But I'm glad I did.
Silence returned again. But it felt different now. More open.
More honest. Naomi took a small breath. Sir, you shouldn't be saying things like that. Why not? Because I work for you.
Her words were careful. Realistic.
We live in completely different worlds.
Joon-woo studied her for a moment.
Then he said something that surprised even himself. I've spent my whole life in that world.
He gestured vaguely toward the city skyline outside.
The one with rules, expectations, and power.
His expression grew thoughtful.
But none of it ever made me feel the way I do when you walk into a room.
Naomi felt her chest tighten slightly. That kind of honesty was dangerous. Especially between them. You don't really know me, she said quietly.
Joon-woo shook his head slightly. I know enough.
And what is that? He answered without hesitation. You're genuine. Another pause.
You don't pretend. Naomi smiled faintly. Maybe that's because I've never had the luxury to pretend.
Joon-woo's eyes softened at her words. He could hear the truth behind them.
For years he had surrounded himself with people who carefully crafted every word they spoke.
But Naomi spoke from the heart. Without calculation. Without strategy.
And that honesty was exactly what made it impossible for him to stay distant. The wind outside brushed softly against the windows.
The storm was nearly gone now. But the moment inside the room felt heavier than before.
Naomi stepped closer to the table where the candles burned.
I should probably go downstairs now, she said quietly.
The staff might need help.
But when she turned toward the door, Joon-woo spoke again.
Naomi.
His voice stopped her immediately. She turned slowly.
This time, he didn't hesitate. I've spent weeks trying to ignore this.
He walked closer. Each step calm. Controlled. But determined.
I told myself it was nothing. Just curiosity. Just distraction.
He stopped only a few feet away from her.
But every day it became harder to pretend. Naomi's breathing had become slightly uneven.
The space between them suddenly felt much smaller. "You're my boss," she whispered.
"Yes. And I'm just the maid."
Joon-woo shook his head slightly. "No." He looked directly into her eyes.
"You're Naomi." Those two simple words carried more meaning than she expected. For the first time since arriving in Korea, she felt like someone powerful was seeing her as more than just a job title.
More than just an employee. Just herself. The candle flames flickered again. And without thinking, Joon-woo reached out gently. His fingers brushed against her wrist. The touch was light, careful, but it sent a small wave of warmth through Naomi's entire body. Neither of them pulled away. For several seconds, they simply stood there. Close. Quiet. The rain outside had almost completely stopped. The storm was ending. But something else was beginning.
Joon-woo spoke again, his voice lower now. "If this is a mistake."
He paused briefly.
"Then it's the first one I've wanted to make." Naomi looked at him, her heart racing. She had spent weeks convincing herself there was a clear line between them. A line that should never be crossed.
Yet standing here now, she realized something. Neither of them wanted to step away.
And in that quiet guest room, lit only by two small candles, Kang Joon-woo finally stopped fighting the feeling he had tried so hard to control. Because the moment he first saw Naomi in that room, his perfectly ordered life had already begun to change. The storm had completely passed. Outside the tall windows of the penthouse, the clouds slowly drifted away, revealing a calm night sky above Seoul. The city lights sparkled again, reflecting across the wet streets below.
But inside the guest room, neither Naomi nor Kang Joon-woo had moved.
The quiet moment between them still hung in the air. His fingers were still gently resting around her wrist.
Not tight. Not demanding. Just enough to keep her from walking away. Naomi could feel the warmth of his touch. Her heart was beating faster than it had all night. She had crossed oceans to build a better life. She had worked hard to keep things simple, clear,
professional. Yet somehow, standing here with the most powerful man in the building, everything felt uncertain.
Joon-woo slowly released her wrist. Not because he wanted to, but because he knew the choice had to be hers.
He stepped back slightly, giving her space. For a man who controlled billion-dollar negotiations with ease, this moment required more patience than anything he had ever done. Naomi looked down at her hands for a moment, gathering her thoughts.
Then she spoke quietly.
"You're not used to hearing no, are you?"
Joon-woo gave a faint smile. "No."
"People probably say yes to you all the time." "That's true."
She lifted her eyes to meet his.
"So why are you asking me instead of just deciding?" The question lingered between them.
Joon-woo answered honestly.
"Because you're the first person in a long time whose answer actually matters to me."
Naomi felt that sentence settle deep in her chest.
For weeks she had sensed the tension growing between them. The glances, the quiet conversations, the strange comfort she felt around him despite his reputation. But hearing him say it out loud made everything real. Still, reality wasn't simple. "You're the CEO of this entire company," she said softly. "And I clean the guest rooms. That's just a job title. It's also the truth." Naomi stepped closer to the window, looking out at the shimmering city lights. "When people see us standing together, they won't just see two people. They'll see power and someone with none." Her voice carried experience. She had learned early in life how the world judged people by status, money, background, appearance. But Joon-woo walked toward the window beside her. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who cared about those things." He looked down at the streets far below. "They measure everything by value, profit, influence." He turned slightly toward her. "But when I see you, none of that seems important." Naomi's eyes softened slightly. "You say that now." "I've said a lot of things in my life," he replied calmly. "Most of them were about business. But this isn't business." The simplicity of his answer surprised her. For the first time since they met, Naomi could see something deeper behind his calm exterior. Loneliness. Not the dramatic kind people talk about, but the quiet loneliness of someone who had built walls around himself for too long. Naomi understood that feeling more than he realized. She had been alone in a foreign country for months. Learning new languages. Working hard. Missing home.
Maybe that was why she had started humming in the hallways. Why she danced when no one was watching. It was her way of keeping joy alive. And somehow, that joy had reached him. She turned fully toward him now. "Why me?" she asked gently.
Joon-woo didn't hesitate this time. "Because you don't see me the way everyone else does." Naomi frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Most people see a CEO. A powerful man. A person they need to impress."
His voice softened.
"But when you talk to me, you just talk." The truth of that statement made Naomi laugh quietly. "I didn't realize that was special." "It is." The candle flames beside them flickered lower now, their light softer than before.
But the warmth in the room felt stronger. Joon-woo took a small breath.
"I'm not asking you to change your life overnight. I'm not asking you to ignore reality."
He paused briefly. "I'm just asking for a chance." Naomi looked at him carefully. For weeks she had heard stories about Kang Joon-woo,
the brilliant CEO, the disciplined leader,
the man who never lost control.
Yet tonight she saw someone different. A man willing to be patient,
honest, vulnerable. She walked slowly toward the door. Joon-woo's heart tightened slightly. For a moment he thought she was leaving. But Naomi stopped beside the doorway and looked back at him.
"You know something," she said. "What?" "You're very persistent." A small smile appeared on his face. "I've been told that before." Naomi considered him for a moment longer. Then she said something that made his entire body relax. "Maybe, that's not such a bad thing."
Joon-woo's expression softened.
"Does that mean?" "It means," Naomi interrupted gently, "that we take things slowly."
She stepped closer again. Not as an employee. Not as someone intimidated by his status. Just as herself.
No rushing. No secrets. And no forgetting that we come from different worlds.
Joon-woo nodded once.
"That's fair."
She studied him one last time before speaking again.
"But if this really is the first mistake you've wanted to make." A playful spark appeared in her eyes. "Then we'll see where it leads." For the first time in years, Kang Joon-woo laughed quietly. Not the polite laugh he used at formal events.
A real one.
And as the final candles slowly burned down beside them,
both of them understood something important. Their story wasn't about power. Or control. Or the world outside the penthouse walls.
It was about two people who met in the quietest room of a very large house, and discovered that sometimes the smallest, most unexpected moments could change everything. Naomi picked up the candle and opened the door. "The power should be back soon," she said.
Joon-woo nodded.
"Yes."
She walked into the hallway.
But before leaving completely, she glanced back with a soft smile. "Good night, Joon-woo." It was the first time she had called him by his name.
And somehow,
that simple moment meant more to him than any business victory he had ever achieved. Because for the first time in a long time, the powerful CEO didn't feel like the loneliest man in the building anymore.